Alright, so this is where we are now. The following morning I let this, the first coat of epoxy green up for about 8-9 hours, something like that. I came out this morning and checked it. I could still dent it with my nail, but it wasn't tacky, so it was ready for the next coat. So this is coat number 2. You can see in the back of the boat here, you can see my Hornsby's Rhino reflecting in the panel. So it is quite a bit shinier than it was yesterday after the first coat. It's substantially shinier now after the second coat, but it's still not where I want it. I want this thing to look like a piece of glass when it's done. So I'll come up here. You can see our epoxy where I built that up, how it just looks shiny as glass, but out here it's kind of orange peel looking. So I want the entire boat to look like this, and it will. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to let this coat, this is coat number 2, I'm going to let it completely cure. I'll let it sit out here, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 days, however long, until I've determined it's completely cured. Wash the entire outside of the boat to get the amine blush off of the epoxy. So wash the entire outside of the boat, and then after I've washed it, I will sand the entire hull, because there are, I doubt my camera will pick it up, but you can see the surface, tiny little bumps all over it. I'm going to sand the entire hull with 80 grit to knock the tips of all of those off, and then I'll apply another epoxy coat, coat number 3, and maybe coat number 4, and I'm hoping after coat number 3 or 4 that the entire thing is just smooth as glass. I mean, we're getting great gloss on this thing as is right now, but when it's done, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to look like a, you can see my son's drum reflecting in the side of the boat here. So this is not even close to as high gloss as it's going to be when we're done, and it's already turning out great. Making good progress. Alright, well, here's the zip now, and if you hadn't noticed, boy, it's not shiny anymore. I took my 80 grit and I roughed up the surface skin, knocking down all of those imperfections. Now, originally, what I thought that was imperfections in the wood. Upon closer examination with a magnifying glass, what they turned out to be were tiny little bubbles, really, really small, millions of them. And I was trying to figure out why. Was it, my roll technique? Maybe the roll was introducing bubbles? Well, that wasn't the case. What had happened was this Hydrotech is kind of an open grain on the face. So what I did was I rolled on my epoxy and then I tipped it with the brush. It looked fantastic. Well, that epoxy soaked deep into the grain of the wood, deep into the open grain, and what happens was, in certain places, there was oxygen in that grain, and when the epoxy filled that grain, the oxygen was displaced and rose to the surface. However, it didn't pop. The bubble stayed in the epoxy. So that rough, it felt almost like sandpaper. It was actually epoxy bubbles, tiny little air bubbles in the epoxy. So I went through and I sanded the entire exterior of the boat again. It's nice and smooth now. There's no bubbles. I'm hoping that the first 2 coats of epoxy sealed all of those bubbles, and then sanding it back leveled them off so that coat number 2 and 3 of the epoxy should be, if I did this right, should be just smooth as glass. So that's where we're at now. We're getting ready to roll on the next couple coats of epoxy, and hopefully no more rough and just shiny and like a piece of wet candy. That's what I'm hoping for. Otherwise, we made a gigantic mistake and we're just going to paint the entire hull. Which I hope not. I'm really hoping for natural finish. Here's a look at the transom, all sanded back. No more gloss. Where'd all my gloss go? It's going to be beautiful. Trust me. Making good progress. Alright, coat number 3.
There's our gloss back, and it is quite a bit shinier. Look at that. Not only can you see the Hornsby's Rhino, but I can read the Hornsby's in the reflection now. So, substantially smoother. Look at that gloss. Look at that. So, looking pretty good. You can see the reflection of my son's drum over here in the side. So, turning out pretty. Oh, look, you can see my legs reflecting. There's my right leg. So, it's pretty shiny now. Is it a mirror? No, but it's pretty dang good. Look at that. You can see the reflection here of my little cartwheel. So, it's pretty shiny now. Pretty smooth. It's not perfect, but pretty dang good. You can see my reflection in it, so that's not too bad. Pretty shiny. And definitely a lot smoother now. Look at that. Smooth is not quite glass, but pretty close. So this is coat number 3. We're going to let this cure up, but I'm pretty happy with how smooth it turned out. And I did something a little different with this one. I rolled it on. The epoxy went substantially farther. Before, where it would take 6 ounces of epoxy to do just one panel, 6 ounces did this panel, and a portion of the rear here. So now that it was smoother, the epoxy went quite a bit farther. I still have about a half gallon left of my epoxy shield, this stuff here, right at a half gallon. So with how it's coating now, I could probably coat it 3-4 more times with the amount that I have left, but I don't think that'll be necessary. Man, look at the shine on that thing. Now it's starting to look like a wet piece of candy. Nice and smooth. Before, you remember, it was real orange peely looking out in here, and that's just about all gone now. Looking pretty good. So this again is coat 3. This is after it sat up for about, I don't know, half hour or so, 45 minutes. It's still sticky, but I wanted to shoot this particular part of the video with the lights off, so you're not getting a false glare off of anything. You can see there the reflection in the boat. Not too shabby. Pretty shiny. Here's a look at the top of it. It's not perfect, but pretty good. So the new method, which I forgot to mention, look at the gloss on that thing. It's just about glass. It's not quite. Anyhow, the new method I was talking about when I applied this epoxy was I would roll it on a thin coat, as thin as I could get, with a foam roller, and then I'd come back with my foam brush and I would work a section over and over and over again with that foam brush, smoothing it out, taking out any lines, any thick or thin spots, everything I could do to make it as smooth as possible. Look at that thing. But anyhow, I kept working it and working it and working it for about probably 45 minutes until it got to a point where I could tell that if I were to work it any more after I had ran my brush over it, it wasn't going to flow back out smooth. So at that point, I quit working it. That's the one thing I did different on this, and that I think made all the difference in the world. On top of sanding it, obviously that took all of the bumps that were in it out, but look at the gloss on that thing. When I say it's almost glass, I'm probably being very, very, very picky, because it is, as you can see, it is super shiny. But that's the method I used a little differently. I would recommend somebody doing that. When I started applying the third coat, it was 58 degrees in my shop, which was a little cool, I admit. But I've been running my little heater over here on high the entire time, and it's sitting at about 66 to 67 degrees in here now, so it's epoxy comfortable. It didn't seem to affect how it rolled out by any means, but pretty dang shiny. So I recommend, if you're going to roll out this epoxy and try to get a glass finish or as close as you can to it, that after you roll it out with a foam roller, work it over and over and over again with a foam brush to remove any heavy or light lines from the roller, to remove any air bubbles you may have introduced with the roller. Just continue to work it until you reach a point where you don't think it'll flow out smooth if you run the brush across it anymore, and then stop. And that's how I achieved this finish. Sorry it's a little dark, but coming right along. Looking fan-damn-tastic. Well, it is April 1st, April Fool's Day. For the month of March, we put in 37 hours on the boat. That's like by far my most amount of hours in one month. We set a record on boat hours in a single month. So 37 hours for the month of March. We went up $290 for a grand total of $1,996.01. We are $3.99 away from cracking $2,000 on this thing. Man, I hope it's going to be worth it. Total hours into the boat of 181 hours. We started the epoxy coat for the month of March, and we also finished off the planking. So now planking, we have a total of 56 hours to get the boat planked. And epoxy coating, we have 10 1/4 hours into. So let's see where we're at. So this is where we're at. It doesn't exactly look all too different than it did after coat number 3 of our epoxy. It is pretty dang smooth. We've got a pretty good gloss on it. It's not quite as glossy as right after coat 3 when it was still wet, but again, I didn't expect it to be. You can still see things reflecting in the hull, you know, so it's pretty shiny, but not as shiny as when it was wet, which is totally fine by me because it's smooth now. That's the important part. So, you know, over the course of April, I've got to get my center skeg built and on. I've got to do my fairing compound over the seams, make sure they're all blended in real nice. But shine will come. You know, a lot of people, everything that's going to be bright work or bright wood, you know, from about this line down, a lot of people coat in varnish, anything that's natural wood, because epoxy doesn't have any UV resistance. If you were to let this bare epoxy here, you know, go out in the sun without some sort of UV protection, eventually it would turn hazy and white and start looking like dump. It could cause the epoxy to fail. So you have to protect the epoxy from UV light. And a lot of people use varnish. I'm not going to use varnish. Varnish is beautiful. It's a really high gloss, a really deep shine, but it is a maintenance pain in the effing neck. And I'm trying to build this boat as maintenance free as possible. I don't want to have to revarnish every other year or every 3 years. I'm looking for a coating that's you know, gonna basically put her on and not think about it for 10 years or 15 years. So instead of doing varnish from my water line down on all this natural wood, what I'm going to do is automotive clear coat. After my bottom paint's done, the boat's flipped over, after I've finished out the interior, and we get all the deck planking done, and that'll be epoxy coated as well. But after all the deck planking's done, then I'm going to trailer it down to my local automotive paint shop, and I'm going to have them spray everything that's the epoxy over bare wood. Every place that the wood's showing is going to get sprayed with automotive clear. And that's going to produce an incredible shine. It's going to be absolutely beautiful, but even more important than pretty is that automotive clear has you know, UV resistance. It'll protect the epoxy from that UV breaking down and ruining it, basically. So that's my plan. It's pretty shiny. I mean, that's respectable. But again, this still is not as shiny as it's gonna be when it's done. You can see it's pretty dang shiny. but she's going to get better and better and better. So we're on to bottom paint now here pretty quick. Again, I've got to do my fairing compound on my seams, get it all faired nice and flat. Everything's smooth, all the transitions. So when this thing's got a nice glossy bottom paint on it, you won't be able to see where the panels touch each other. If I do it right, it'll be perfectly smooth. You won't be able to tell where this panel meets this panel or that panel meets that panel. You won't be able to tell where I built this up because I'm going to, again, bring that fairing compound out kind of wide and smooth all of that in. But it looks pretty dang good glossy anyhow, so I think we're doing something right, you know. So that's where we are. More fairing. Mix up a little fairing compound, get everything faired and true, flat, beautiful. Get my skeg built for down the center to help the boat track and steer. And get her bottom painted. Once she's bottom painted and set up, flip it over, we'll start building the interior. So we're making great progress. I'm so proud of this boat. It's turning out fantastic. These Glen-L plans are, you know, for somebody like me that's just a total amateur boat builder, these Glen-L plans are fantastic. So thanks again for watching. Please don't forget, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe, rate, and comment. I love hearing you guys' comments, and I do my best to, you know, to answer them or join the conversation and comment back. So hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you on the next update of Building the Zip.